Realme GT 2 Pro 5G camera test. Hello my dear friends, how are you? I hope you are well, in good health and in the happiest of days. Today I have a new video with you, which is testing the Realme GT 2 Pro 5G camera. I hope you like it, but before watching the video, subscribe to the channel to receive everything new. Now let us follow the explanation. 250 megapixel sensors. Fisheye and microscopic lenses. The Realme GT 2 Pro has similar camera setups to the iQOO 9 Pro and Oppo Find X5 Pro with 250MP sensors, but they use different optics. In this case, the primary shooter uses a 50 megapixel Sony IMX766, 1.56" with 1.0 micro pixels. The sensor is supported by OIS and supports omnidirectional DAF, and the lens offers a fairly wide f/1.8 aperture. The ultra-wide camera is usually secondary to the main camera, and it's probably the star of the show here. It is one of the few cameras that has a 150-degree field of view. The only other phone running such a setup is the aforementioned iQOO 9 Pro. Behind the ultra-wide lens is a Samsung ISOCELL JN1 sensor, which is 1/2.76" in size and has 0.64 micro pixels. The lens has an f/2.2 aperture and no autofocus, despite a similar implementation of the same sensor on the camera. Autofocus is enabled on iQOO 9 Pro. The third camera is the so-called microlens camera, which is essentially a 3 megapixel, f/3.0. camera with a microscope level zoom lens. Native zoom is 20x, but up to 40x is offered as digital zoom. The unit supports autofocus and produces stylish images. On the front, we have a 32MP f/2.4, 1/2.74", 0.8 micro camera for selfies that are captured at the full 32MP resolution. Camera menus. Fixed Realme software does not access the default camera app because it looks exactly the same as before. A swipe left or right toggles between the usual camera modes, while the More section accommodates secondary modes, including Expert. The latter gives you precise control over ISO, exposure, focus, white balance, and shutter speed. In standard photo mode, you'll find an eye toggle for color boosting, HDR control, and 3 toggle switches for super zoom, main zoom, and 2x zoom. To our surprise, the featured 150-degree and fisheye modes are tucked away in additional camera modes, as well as the microscopic lens. You can always rearrange them to your liking and place them alongside the main camera modes in the carousel. Daylight samples. Main camera. The daylight samples look great and are comparable to samples from major brands in the industry. Sharpness is great, the level of detail is good, and dynamic range is excellent. Going in with the camera is expected to produce images that are a bit noisier and sharpness drops a bit, but fine detail is preserved. Color reproduction is a bit more conservative, so if you're after more intense colors, use the IAA switch located above the viewfinder. It enhances color saturation depending on the scenario. Shooting at full 50MP resolution carries little to no benefits. You get more detail but at the cost of sharpness and noise. 2x zoom. Since there's no zoom, the phone resorts to cropping the center of the 12.5MP deleted images and upscaling them back to 12.5MP. Or at least that's what we suspect is happening behind the scenes. The end result isn't what you'd normally expect from a proper 2x telephoto camera, but the overall quality is good enough to post on social media. Sharpness is okay, the level of detail is good, and the dynamic range is fairly wide. In general, the presentation is similar to that of non-magnified specimens. Ultra-wide camera. The ultra-wide camera is paired with an ultra-wide lens with an advertised 150-degree field of view, so we think standard ultra-wide shots are cropped and upscaled to 12.5MP for consistency. As a result, it's much softer than the main camera samples, but it's also quite detailed. Compared to other ultra-wide solutions, the GT 2 Pro outshines the competition. The consistency between standard 12.5MP images and ultra-wide images is clear. Both cameras produce comparable still images, minus sharpness, with recognizable color reproduction and overall presentation. This in turn means that color reproduction is a reality of life. Dynamic range is also impressive, as is the ability to retain acceptable clarity indoors. Sure, noise starts creeping in, but nothing too major. The sensor outputs good images even in the most challenging lighting conditions. Oh, and the lens correction algorithm is impressive, especially considering the wider than usual lens. 158 degrees and fisheye samples. If you're willing to trade in some of that ultra-fine sharpness, which isn't much, to begin with, you can get some pretty dramatic looking shots. The overall presentation is exactly the same as standard ultra-wide shots, but barrel distortion is considerably more pronounced, which is the desired effect anyway. Fan of the fisheye effect? Well, the GT2 Pro is capable of taking some great shots. Clarity and detail degrade quickly, but will still look great on social media channels. Microscopic camera. The native zoom is 20x, and some digital enhancements push it to 40x. In my opinion, the previous shots look much nicer. There's a slight learning curve as you have to get really close to the subject, but there's also autofocus support to help you out. Best of all, the LED flashes on both ends of the lens help provide additional light so your subject is well exposed. Low light samples. Main camera. Even without night mode, the GT2 Pro shows great nighttime performance. Images are generally sharp and contain plenty of detail, including shadows. The dynamic range is wide, and there's definitely some HDR and background image stacking, but most of the time, the standard photo mode didn't keep us waiting. You can easily see fine details in the dark while highlights and bright light sources are contained and not clipped. Noise is also not easy to detect, and colors are close to reality again. Honestly, there's not much to say about these photos. They are amazing. Using night mode brings out more detail across the entire scene while increasing the brightness of shadows. Sharpness and color reproduction remain comparable. We noticed that the dedicated night mode isn't too aggressive in terms of clarity and exposure. It doesn't make the footage look like it's on display. If we want to be selective, more clarity in general wouldn't hurt. 2x zoom. Two surprises here. The first is that the standard photo mode produces better results than the night mode. The second is that the 2x zoom mode produces good images primarily in low light. Sure, there's a significant loss in sharpness, but other than that, zoomed in photos look good for social media purposes too. Expect a similar display as unzoomed shots. Ultra wide camera. For an ultra wide camera in the dark, this camera seems to do a more than decent job. We can see a similar display to the main camera with realistic colors, a decent amount of detail, a wide dynamic range, and balanced highlights. Noise is also absent. Night mode won't necessarily improve image quality, and instead may introduce some overly sharp halos around fine objects and details. However, it helps bring out more detail from the shadows, brightening them without overdoing it. You can definitely get some nice looking ultra wide shots in the dark no matter the mode, and that's something very few phones can do. Samples 150 degrees. Because the 150 degree lens adds a lot of edge softness, which is more of an issue in the dark. The 150 degree samples in the dark have a somewhat narrower dynamic range as well, based on dark shadows and clipped highlights in some cases. Once you're done with the real-life examples, take a look at our image comparison tool to grab some pixel images and see how the Realme GT2 Pro performs against the competition. Photo. To be honest, we were expecting more portrait shots. The faux bokeh effect is convincing enough, and you can adjust the strength of the blur using the electronic aperture slider. However, we expected more from a flagship phone. Even in good lighting conditions, images appear a bit soft, and the subject's skin is often a bit pale. You can also detect some noise in uniform areas. Personal photos. Good selfies, although a little pale. A touch more color wouldn't have hurt, but we appreciated the level of detail and sharpness. Noise becomes more noticeable in suboptimal lighting conditions, which is to be expected. The dynamic range is wide in standard photo mode, perhaps due to HDR being enabled, but you can expect accurate exposure of the subject's face at all times. Video recording. The presence of this flagship SoC allows the GT2 Pro to record 4320p videos at 30 fps and also implement eyes on 2160p videos. However, 8K video is unstable, and you probably shouldn't resort to this mode unless you have an 8K TV. Speaking of stabilization, The phone doesn't offer that action camera-like stabilization that we've become accustomed to seeing in modern flagship phones over the past couple of years. It's strange because we've seen it on other Realme devices that support 1080p mode. It may be added with a future update. Anyway, the 8K video below shows good resolution and level of detail with color reproduction being conservative again. The dynamic range is wide, but videos look like they need a touch of contrast. Interestingly, we notice that 8K footage has a narrower field of view compared to 4K videos below. 4K videos look quite similar but understandably with slightly less detail and a softer feel. For 2160p shots, we can say that it is pretty good. The ultra-wide camera can also shoot 4K videos, and to our surprise, these clips look more interesting than those captured with the main camera. By more pleasing, we mean that colors are much better, the dynamic range is wide, detail is excellent, and sharpness has suffered a bit more than ever before. Compared to other ultra-wide videos, at the end of the video, I thank you for watching and I hope you liked it, and see you in a good video.